Let's turn to chapter 4. We're going to look at these verses here this evening of Nehemiah, and we've went through the first 3 chapters. We've looked at a very interesting story. It's been challenging to me to revisit this again because of the aspect of how that he led, how he was able to challenge others, how that he was able to do things in the way that he did. He did things the right way. It would have been very easy for Nehemiah to get in a rush, to try to do things in and of his own power, but he waited upon the Lord. You know, when we wait on the Lord, we find the best results. When we wait on the Lord to handle our problems for us, He does. I put this on a post I did earlier this week on Facebook about obstructions that are in our path. If we trust in the Lord, He'll take care of the obstructions. He'll take care of those things that are in our way that prevent us or are preventing us from doing what He has called us to do. But the Bible tells us to love our neighbors and also to love our enemies, and probably because they are generally sometimes the same people. These words were from Gilbert Keith Chesterton, and they were certainly true in Nehemiah's time. They were certainly true for him. Nehemiah and his arrival to Jerusalem was a very wide awakening or a very wide opening situation for many people that were there. His arrival to Jerusalem brought the stir for sure. It brought the stir of attention that people that were there that did not want to see Jerusalem rebuilt or wanted it to stay in its same condition didn't like that. See, his arrival in Jerusalem was a threat to Sanballat and his associates. They wanted to keep the Jews weak. They wanted to see them in a state of desolation. They wanted them to remain the same. Why was that? Because a strong Jerusalem would endanger the balance of the power in the region that was there. And it would also rob Sanballat and his associates, his friends, of their influence on people. It would also hurt them in their wealth and their aspects of what they were trying to pursue. See, when things look like they're going great, and when we're serving the Lord, when things are going well, you can expect what to come? Trouble. Because when things are going great in the church and things are going wonderful, the devil's going to be trying to do whatever he can to try to disrupt that, to try to throw it off track. And why is that? Because he does not want to see progress of any kind in the church. He doesn't want to see any progress made. I'll never forget years ago over in Oak Ridge, I was serving as a youth pastor, and I had invited a friend of mine to come. We had several speakers that would come during the week, and he came on this night, and boy, I'll tell you what, that night the Lord just decided that He was going to drop the buckets of water, and the storms came that night. Boy, it was just a really just wicked, just a horrendous storm outside. Well, as you know, it was going well that week. A lot of good things were happening in the service. Well, he was getting ready to go up and preach, my friend. And as he got up on stage, the power went out. You couldn't see anything, and to make matters worse, my friend is a black man. So that made it even worse than what it was, okay? But I will have to say, and he knows I like to kid him around about this, he has some of the whitest teeth that I have ever seen. But boy, he was up there and he was smiling, he was talking, and you could just see them white pearlies in his mouth. But you know, that night with all that happening, it would have been very easy for us just to close the books, say we're done, and Satan would have been pleased with that. And he would have won. He would have. But we talked about it, he decided to have service, and we had some lights. There were some security lights in the building so you could see him moving around. You could definitely see him when he smiled, for sure, where he was. But he opened the Word of God, and it helped because he had an iPad there, and as the iPad would reflect, you could see his face. But as he began to preach, it was such a powerful message, and if we would have decided to have given up, if we would have decided to allow Satan to really discourage us by the circumstances, 3 souls wouldn't have got saved that night. And so as we look at this, when things are going good, Satan's not going to leave us alone. And this is the same case here with Nehemiah. Things were going good, and guess what happens? Here comes trouble. Here comes problems. Well, see, as long as the people in Jerusalem were content with their sad situation, the enemy did what? He left them alone. Hey, at church, as long as we're sad and we're discouraged and we're down, Satan's not going to really fool with us much. You know why? Because why would he need to? You're already down. You're already defeated. And see, as long as the people in Jerusalem were content with their sad situation, they would be left alone. But when the Jews began to serve the Lord, when they heard the voice of Nehemiah, when he called to them and said, "Let's go build," the Jews got up and they were ready to put their feet into action, their hands into action. And they were ready to serve the Lord and bring glory to His name. That's when the enemy got mad. The enemy became frustrated. See, opposition is not only an evidence that God is blessing, but it is also an opportunity for us to grow. It's a really just tremendous opportunity for us to go, because difficulties that come in life, those challenges that are there ahead of us that seem like they are really just not able to be achieved, those things that we stick with, those things that we pursue, God grows us through those situations. See, Satan wanted to use these problems as weapons to destroy the work. But God was using this as tools to build His people, to get His people where that they needed to be. As we look at this, starting here in chapter number 4, and you go through chapter number 6, these chapters describe at least 9 different tactics that the enemy used to stop the work of the wall. Here's the 9. Now, we're not going to read all these, but we're going to talk about them some here in chapter number 4. They faced ridicule, plots of war, discouragement, fear, selfishness, compromise, slander, threats, and intrigue. These were all different types of tactics that Satan, the enemy, was trying to use to discourage the people from doing the work that they were called to do. There's been many of men that have preached sermons with this title, Steadfast and Unmovable. What does this mean? That none of these things that Satan threw out there trying to get the people off of the tracks worked. None of them worked, and because Nehemiah was steadfast and unmovable, and he led his people to complete the task he had challenged them to do in how many days? 52 days. You know, that should be the theme of our life. Steadfast and unmovable. We're steadfast in what we believe. We are firm in what we believe, but also we are unmovable. We're not going to allow Satan to try to get us off the beaten path. We're not going to allow Satan to try to get us off the path of where we should be heading. We're going to be steadfast and unmovable. And this is what we see here with Nehemiah, even though they were trying to discourage the people. See, Paul wrote of Satan in 2 Corinthians chapter number 2, verse number 11. He said, "For we are not ignorant of his devices." You know, that's important because I believe some of us are actually sometimes fooled by his devices, aren't we? The same old stuff that Satan likes to throw and try to trip us up, it seems like we fall for it time and time again. He's the old deceiver. And guess what? He's been doing it for a long time. But the 4th chapter of Nehemiah presents 4 of Satan's devices that we're going to look at here tonight. 4 of Satan's devices for opposing the Lord's work. But it also tells how God's people can be steadfast, how that they can be unmovable in defeating the enemy. So the first thing we're going to look at here this evening is ridicule. The people faced ridicule. Look at with me in verses 1 through 6. But it came to pass that when Sanballat heard that we builded the wall, he was wroth. What does wroth mean in the Hebrew? It means that he is literally, you know my old terminology, he's biting nails. He's just gritting his teeth. He is so mad. He is upset and took great indignation and mocked the Jews. And he spake before his brethren and the army of Samaria and said, What do these feeble Jews? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in the day? And when they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned? Now Tobiah the Ammonite was by him, and he said, Even they which build, if a fox go up, he shall even break down their stone wall. Hear, O our God, for we are despised, and turn their reproach upon their own head, and give them for a prey in the land of captivity, and cover not their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out from before thee, for they have provoked thee to anger before the builders. So built us we the wall, and all the wall was joined together unto the half thereof, for the people had a mind to work. Thomas Carlyle once said this. He said, ridicule is the language of the devil. The enjoyment that he takes in ridiculing. Shakespeare called ridicule paper bullets of the brain, but those bullets have slain many, many of warriors and people. You know, ridicule is a thing, it's a constant theme in the Bible if you look at it. People that were ridiculed for standing up for what they believed in, ridiculed for what they stood for. I mean, Goliath, he ridiculed David. He said, You come to me with staffs, you come to me in such a way, this small, puny, insignificant boy coming before me, the great champion, Goliath. Ridicule. Jesus was mocked by the soldiers during his trial. Jesus was also mocked by the rabble while he was hanging there on the cross. But also many heroes of the faith had to endure mocking, the ridicule that they've had to experience. See, Sanballat and his friends had begun to ridicule the Jews even before the work on the wall had begun. If you look back at Nehemiah chapter 2, verse number 19, it said they laughed us to scorn and despised us. They come and they were prepared, and guess what they were doing? They're standing there with their arms folded, looking at the Jews, just laughing, just having a good old time, laughing and mocking them over what they were preparing to do. Now, the Bible isn't clear, and many people aren't clear as well about what type of relationship Sanballat had with the army of Samaria. Possibly, there is a lot of speculation here. Possibly it could have been that the army assembled to show strength in order to scare the Jews. Maybe it was their weapon. Now remember, the people of Samaria, Jews, we know what type of history, what type of relationship is there, that they were trying to assemble to actually send a message to say, you should be afraid of us. Possibly that was, not 100% for sure. But by making this initial speech before the army, Sanballat did something. He intensified the power of his ridicule, as he also made some important people laugh as well, as they were laughing and mocking the Jews. What did he do to them? Well, first of all, he called them feeble Jews. Feeble. What does that word feeble mean? It means withered and miserable. Now, he saw it. I mean, he wasn't wrong. They were in a bad position of what they were. I mean, they didn't have anything to brag about. Their wall and the wall was down, the gates were burned. I mean, it was a bad situation here. Also talking about this, he said those Jews had no human resources that people could see. How in the world are they going to do this? You know, they were right about one thing. They couldn't see any human resources, physical resources. But one thing they couldn't see that was really there was that they had the Almighty God with His spiritual resources that was going to build this wall, that was going to repair and do these things that needed to take place. You know, thinking about his reference to the feeble Jews, I'm reminded of 12 feeble, insignificant, according to the world standards, men who turned the world upside down when Jesus called them and said, "Come follow me." See, God delights in using feeble instruments to get His work accomplished. You know, sometimes you wonder, how in the world could He use somebody like me? I'm from so-and-so town. I'm from so-and-so background. How in the world could God use me? Who are we to ask about what a true, living, powerful God can do? How He can use someone of a feeble standard. These feeble Jews that Sanballat's talking about, Nehemiah was able to speak into them confidence. He was able to give them instruction, and God used that so that they could rebuild what He had called them to do. But also He ridiculed the work by asking some questions. Here's some questions that were asked that we see here from the passage of Scripture. First of all, will they fortify themselves? Now, this must have evoked laughter from the Samaritan army, don't you think? How could a remnant, now I'm talking about, that's probably a good term, a remnant of feeble Jews build a wall strong enough to protect the city from the army? The Samaritans were looking, it's going to be a piece of cake. It's going to be a cakewalk. It's going to be the easiest thing that we've ever done. Also, number 2, a question was asked, will they sacrifice? It will take more prayer and worship to rebuild this city. This was Sanballat denying what God could do. You know the reason why he was denying it was because he didn't know the true God. He didn't have a relationship with the God that Nehemiah worshiped. He didn't have that. But also, number 3, will they make an end in a day? This was suggesting that the Jews didn't know what they were getting themselves into. Now, I have to be honest with you here. You ever looked at something, you got into it, and you're thinking, this is bigger than what I thought? You ever had that happen? Oh, I have. You start into a project at home, and you get into something, and you find out something else is wrong. You get into that problem, you find out this is deeper than what I thought. But here it's asking, didn't the Jews know what they were getting themselves into? And they were probably thinking to themselves, they'll know eventually what they've gotten themselves into, and eventually they'll just throw up their hands and they'll quit. There's been many people that have just quit. They've given up. But a simple and a great reminder for us as Christians is that we should never quit. We should always work. Be willing to roll up our sleeves. Do the hard work. But also, number 4, will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which were burned? Now, the stones were taken out of the rubbish heaps and probably were so old. Remember, this is an old wall. This is old gate here, and damaged that they would never last when set into the new wall. Now, Sanballat is offering this up, and he's asking these questions. But while it is true that limestone is softened by fire, it's also true that the walls were broken down while the gates were consumed with fire, but there was still plenty of material that could be used. Remember what I said, that there were some places of the wall that were not as bad as others, and some of the materials more than likely could have been reused for the builders to use. Now, Tobiah, one of the other associates, the Ammonite, was one of the visiting dignitaries at the Samaritan army inspection. And when he was taking his turn to make a speech, he ridiculed the finished product. Here, it says, now Tobiah in verse number 3, the Ammonite was by him, and he said, even that which they build, if a fox go up, he should even break down their stone wall. Wow. You know what he's saying? He's using a fox here, but I like to reference it this way as well. He's literally saying that you could just go and blow on it, and it'd fall down. You know, it's sort of like it reminds me of the 3 little pigs. Y'all remember that story, right? First little pig, what he built his house out of? Y'all remember? Straw. And he was in there and he was comfortable. Boy, here comes that big old bad wolf. He huffs and he puffs and he blows, and that straw just goes everywhere. That pig runs to the next house, the straw sticks, and what happens to the next one? Blows, and boy, them sticks go everywhere. It wasn't until they come to the stone that he huffed and he puffed, and boy, he blew all day long, but he couldn't get to fall down. Some stories, he finally tried going down to the chimney, but they had a fix there too. They had that fire prepared for him, and boy, they lit him out there, didn't they? But the fact of the matter was, he was mocking and saying that you wouldn't need an army to knock down this wall. All you got to do is go over and just blow, and it'll fall down. But see, what Sanballat and Tobiah said was true from a human point of view. It was pretty bad. But for the Jewish remnant was weak and poor, and work was too great for them, but they had great faith, like we mentioned, in a great God. And ultimately, that's what made the difference. So a question. How did Nehemiah respond to the ridicule? How do we respond to ridicule when it comes our way? Well, it's pretty simple what he did. He prayed, like we should as well, and he asked God to fight for him. You know, there's many battles that we're never going to win in and of our own power. But when we pray and we ask the undefeated champion of all time to fight for us, we're guaranteed victory. And that's what he did here. And this is the third time you find Nehemiah praying, and it will not be his last. He didn't waste his time replying to their words. He didn't need to, because the one he prayed to knew their words. He knew their actions. He knew what they intended to do. See, Nehemiah's prayer resembles the imprecatory psalms such as Psalm 69, Psalm 79, and 139. And these psalms here are a reflection of him praying, asking God to fight on his behalf, to bring down and bring victory for his people. But this is the way Nehemiah responded. You know, it's very easy for us to do something when ridicule comes. We want to dwell on it. We want to consider it. We want to think to ourselves, what can I do? It's best just to let the Lord handle it. And when we do that, we'll see that we end up a lot better than what we did if we tried to handle it on our own. So first of all, we see the ridicule, but also the intimidating plots that were given here. Look at verse 7 through 9. And it came to pass that when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and Ammonites, the Arabians, and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were made up and that the breaches began to be stopped, then they were very wroth and conspired all of them together to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it. Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto our God and set a watch against them day and night because of them. So a common enemy and a common cause brought four different groups of people together to stop the work of the walls of Jerusalem. But the city was not completely surrounded, however, by enemies. To the east were Sanballat and the Samaritans. Okay, you got that to the east. Tobiah and the Ammonites to the south, Geshem and the Arabs to the west, and then we have the Ashdodites. Now, Ashdod was perhaps the most important city in Philistine at that time, and the Philistines did not want to see a strong community in Jerusalem because this would have been a threat to them. This would have been a threat to their ways. And God's people sometimes have difficulty working together. We know that. I mean, you look at churches today, there's always going to be differing opinions. But the people of the world have no problem uniting in opposition to the work of the Lord, though, do they? They'll unite together to try to speak against or try to say how that the church is actually wrong. And as the enemy sees the work progressing, they become angry and decided to plan a secret attack. Or if they said, something has to happen, guys. We're wrong. We're upset. We're mad. And now there has to be some type of way that we're going to have to try to thwart this. We're going to have to find some type of way that we're going to try to throw us off track. So here they plan a secret attack against Jerusalem. And we know that this has been a case throughout history with the Jews. Satan despises the Jews. Why does he despise the Jews? Because the Jews are God's chosen people. That's who he made his covenant with, the Jewish nation. And so Nehemiah suspected that his enemies would launch an attack. Remember, he's smart. Not only is Nehemiah a man that followed after God, he had a heart for God, but I believe Nehemiah was a very smart individual, so he did something that was very key and very important. He posted a guard and encouraged the people to do something, to pray. That's a key theme in this book. Something so simple, something of such simplicity that oftentimes we forget, is that when difficult times arise, it's as easy as just taking time before we do anything else and pray. And pray. Now the workers held both tools and weapons. This was important. And were prepared to fight when the signal was given. There would be a signal given that if there was some type of breach, if the individual, the enemies tried to break through, there was an important announcement. There would have been some type of signal that was given for them to know that this was about to take place. So here we see the plots. But also here comes one of discouragement. Boy, Satan loves to use his discouragement. I'm reminded of a story. I read this earlier. I want to share this with you. Former heavyweight boxer James Quick Tillis is a cowboy from Oklahoma who fought out of Chicago in the early 1980s. Listen to this. This is good. He still remembers his first day in the Windy City after his arrival from Tulsa. I got off the bus with 2 cardboard suitcases under my arms in downtown Chicago and stopped in front of the Sears Tower. I put my suitcases down and I looked up at the tower and I said to myself, I'm going to conquer Chicago. When I looked down, the suitcases were gone. You know, it's easy to get discouraged, isn't it? It's very easy. Very easy to happen. Pressures from without often create problems from within. It isn't easy to carry on your work when you're surrounded by danger. And daily face the demands of a task that seems impossible. Discouragement can creep in. I mean, think about this. You're starting a project. You're starting to rebuild an engine. You're starting to rebuild something that has been torn down, and you're starting literally from scratch. And you look at all this stuff around you, and it's easy for what to set in? Discouragement. Very easy for discouragement to set in. But if the Jews became discouraged, what was going to happen? They'd be defeated. They'd defeat themselves. And his Sanballat and his allies would never have to wage war. And you know why? Because they wouldn't have to. The Jews would have felt like they had no purpose. There was nothing for them to pursue and fight for. And this is a key weapon in Satan's arsenal: discouragement. You know, thinking about discouragement, we go all the way back to Numbers chapter 13, the story of the Israelites. It was discouragement that kept Israel from entering the promised land at Kadesh Barnea. Discouragement. There's giants in that land. There's too many. Too many. We can't go, even though God told them it was theirs. You know, when God tells you something's yours, it's yours. But oftentimes what happens? Discouragement. That's what kept them back. You know, the theme of for those who take their eyes off the Lord and start focusing on self starts with this: we are not able. We are not able. Now, these discouraged Jewish workers were agreeing with the enemy who said that they were feeble. They started to believe it. We're feeble. We're inadequate. We can't complete the task. Sanballat had openly declared that the work would stop, and guess what? It was on the brink, and it almost did. Almost. Remember, almost. It didn't, but it almost. So why did the discouragement arise from the royal tribe of Judah? An important question to ask. We look at Genesis 49, 8 through 12. We look at these verses. They had David's blood in their veins. And you would think they would be men and women of great faith, of great courage. What's going on here? Why would such a question even be considered? But the answer is found actually later on in Nehemiah 6, verses 17 through 19. What happened, you ask? What happened here to get them to this position? Some people in the tribe of Judah were secretly cooperating with the enemy. You know, everything isn't always as it seems to be. Not everybody's on board, unfortunately. You had some people cooperating with the enemy. What was that? It was a lack of faith. It was the discouragement, thinking that this can't happen. Nehemiah, you're a great guy. We know you've influenced a lot of people, but we're just not really for sure. The ties of marriage, we find out later on, were stronger than the bonds of commitment to the Lord. You know what it goes to tell you? What's the old saying? Blood is thicker than what? Water. Meaning that family ties, regardless of right or wrong, it doesn't matter. Family will go even if it's wrong sometimes. Family will go when it's right. They'll side. And here we see there was a lot of family connections here, a lot of bonds here that were made that were cooperating with the enemy. And a lot of these leaders of Judah were not fully dedicated to the Lord, but were more interested in doing what? Making money. You know, that money speaks, doesn't it? The combination of marriage and money divided their loyalties, and they became the cause of discouragement. Guess what they would say among the people? Hey, look at the money we're going to be getting here. You know, Nehemiah, he's a great guy, and boy, he can talk the talk, and boy, he's came a long way. He's really concerned about us. But you know, that money, that feels a lot better to me than what Nehemiah is actually talking about. Yeah, the love of money. That's right. See, discouragers are often doubters and what? Compromisers. But you know, getting back to Nehemiah here, all this is going on, all these distractions that were applicable to this situation. A lot of stuff going on here, trying to rebuild the wall, trying to get things corrected. But you know what Nehemiah did? Well, one thing he didn't do, I don't think he got in a big worry. I don't think he gave it another thought. He didn't pay much attention to these individuals about the complaining, but he just went right to work. He just kept on working. You know, it's sort of like Noah when he was building the ark there with his sons. You know the people that were around there, that lived around there? Oh, you know each day they probably laughed and scorned at Noah. Noah, what are you talking about? A flood? God's going to flood this world? You know, they probably laughed at him. Laughed at his sons. Laughed at the family. At night when they were all there eating together, all those people, while Noah and his sons were hard at work, oh, they were just chowing down, having a good old time, laughing at Noah, I bet. Just giving him down the road about how silly, how crazy this is. But guess what? In the end, they found out he wasn't. When God only spared him, his wife, his 3 sons, and their spouses. But Nehemiah didn't care. He just kept on working. And the most important thing for us to grasp from this about Nehemiah is if you take time away from your work to listen to everybody who wants your attention, guess what? You will never get anything done. You never will. And Nehemiah knew this. He knew that if he could have listened. He could have listened to this person who came up to him and said, hey, listen, Nehemiah, have you considered that money? Nehemiah, have you considered that we won't have what we need to finish this wall? And Nehemiah would have had to stop, lay down his tools, put his hand on their shoulder and say, no, that's not the way that it is. He'd have to lay down his tools, get over here. He'd have to take time from investing in the people who wanted to work. So what he did was he just didn't focus on that garbage. Literally, that's what it was. It's a bunch of nonsense. It was just a bunch of craziness. And so he didn't give time to these complainers because he knew if he did, he wouldn't get anything done. Nothing. All right, let's go here to this last part, to the last part of the chapter. And another thing that we see here that tried to happen was fear. It says here in verse number 11, and our adversary said, they shall not know, neither see, till we come in the midst among them, and slay them, and cause the work to cease. And it came to pass that when the Jews which dwelt by them came, they said unto them 10 times, from all places whence ye shall return unto us, they will be upon you. Therefore said I, in the lower places behind the wall, and on the higher places I even set the people after their families, with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and rose up and said unto the nobles and to the rulers and to the rest of the people, be not ye afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your houses. Now I've stopped there a minute because I almost think of like a movie. I don't know. I'm a big historical person on movies, but I don't know if y'all ever seen the movie Braveheart. It's got Mel Gibson in it. It's a historical movie. Now, I'm not saying I approve of everything in the movie, okay? There's a little language here and there. But one of the things that he did is to remember what we're fighting for. And here we see with Nehemiah here, he says, listen. He said, telling all the people here, remember the Lord. Be not ye afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. He says, remember the Lord, but also remember this. You're fighting for your heritage. You're fighting for your family. Once again, what's Nehemiah doing? He's given the motivational speech here for them to continue to go and to fight. So we go back here to verse number 15. It came to pass when our enemies heard that it was known unto us, and God had brought their counsel to naught, that we returned all of us to the wall, every one unto his work. You know what they did after the speech? They got back to work. And it came to pass from the time forth, and the half of my servants wrought in the work, and the other half of them held both the spears and the shields and the bows and the habergeons, and the rulers were with behind all the house of Judah. They which builded on the wall, and they that bear burdens with those that laid it, every one with their hands wrought in the work, and with the other hand held a weapon. For the builders, every one that had his sword girded by his hand, so he builded, and the sound of the trumpet was by me. And I said unto the nobles, and to the rulers, and to the rest of the people, the work is great and large, and we are separated upon the wall, one from another. In what place, therefore, if ye hear the sound of the trumpet, resort ye thither unto us, our God shall fight for us. So we labored in the work, and half of them held the spears from the rising of the morning till the stars appeared. Likewise, at the same time, I said unto the people, let every one with his servant lodge within Jerusalem, and in the night they may be a guard to us, and labor on the day. So neither I, nor my brethren, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard which followed me, none of us put off our clothes, saving that every one of them put off for washing. Now the Jews who lived in the outlying villages kept bringing a report to the city that the enemy was planning another surprise attack. Now, this come from without. Now, we don't know. There's a lot of speculation once again here about this on whether it was just spreading rumors. You know how rumors spread. You know, you can have 12 people, one person on one end. They could start saying something. By the time it gets to the other end, it could be a completely different story. The same story could be completely different because the way news travels oftentimes isn't the same news. So this possibly could have been a rumor. Could have been misinterpreted, could have been just crazy information. Or it could have been to promote a conspiracy. We don't really know for sure. But they did repeat the story repeatedly, so it was likely that this could have been a tale that they were going to bring a battle. Now, 10 times is a Hebrew phrase meaning many times. We see that reference there of 10 times. We think of numbers there being, but literally this just means in the original language that this was many times that this occurred. So Nehemiah didn't respond immediately and was probably praying for God's guidance once again as we look at this. But the important thing to realize is that he wasn't afraid. However, he did see his people starting to become frightened. And this is when he began to act. He started to act. Nehemiah's first step. Remember, he's always someone that's very punctual. He's ready to get into action, do what's necessary to lead his people. The first step was to post guards at the most conspicuous and vulnerable places on the wall. The enemy could see that the Jews were what? They were ready to fight. They were prepared. Remember what I said? If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. He was prepared. He was ready to lead his people to fight. He armed their families, entire families. Dads, moms, everybody was ready to fight. You know why they were ready to fight? It's because it was their home. And when you have your home and your family, and I guarantee you, if you wake up one night and you hear that somebody's broke in, and I will be the first one to tell you, I'm going to do everything in my power to protect my home. And this is what we see here. They were ready to protect their home, knowing that they would stand and encourage one another. Now the Jews not only repaired the walls near their own houses, but they stood with their families to protect their home and their city. They got out and they stood, and they were willing to do whatever was necessary to protect. Now, after looking the situation over, Nehemiah then encouraged the people not to be afraid, but to look for the Lord's help. That great statement that I gave you there. This is what's coming, but remember God who has been faithful. Remember what He can do. He reminded the people that they were fighting for their nation, their city, and their families. You know, the Great Revolutionary War, when Great Britain, it seemed like that Great Britain was going to win and that the American Revolution, the colonies were in big trouble. And here we see that a lot of individuals, the Minutemen, the people that came that would leave their farms, people that had no training really, would leave their homes and would go fight for a cause. Tells you why they wanted to do that. Because they did not want to lose something that they had, and it was their freedom. And so here we see they wanted to fight. They wanted to do whatever was necessary to push forward. But like them, we must also remember ourselves as well, that we have a great God that's in control. We have to be mindful of that. We have to remember it. Now, when the enemy learned that they were prepared, guess what they did? They backed off. They said, wait a minute, hey, I thought you told us that these Jews were feeble. What's going on here? What's happening? What's going on with this situation? So they began to back away. But Nehemiah knew he couldn't interrupt the work every time he heard a new rumor. Remember, I told you that he could not take time away from his work just to listen to every situation. So he did something. This is how he solved the problem. Half the men worked on the wall while the other half stood guard. That's a good plan, isn't it? We'll take breaks. You work, I'll watch. Then I'll take a break, we'll flip-flop. The people carrying materials also carried weapons with them. So they were working, but they had their weapons ready to go at any instant. And the workers on the walls carried swords with them, so they were prepared. Nehemiah then spoke words of encouragement to the people. We see this toward the end. They were involved in a great work, and no matter where they were, they were to keep an open ear for the sound of the trumpet, because when the trumpet sounded, what was to happen? It was time to fight. It was time to defend. And you know, there's another trumpet that's going to sound one day, isn't there? And at this trumpet, what's going to happen? He's coming. He's going to rapture us out of here. But also, Nehemiah instituted a second shift and required the workers from the other towns to stay in Jerusalem at night and help guard the city. So what a great plan. What a great plan by a man who, yes, loved the Lord, but also at the same time, he was smart. And he thought it through, and most importantly, he heard from the Lord, and he listened, and he put it into action. Because the people needed to hear this. They did. Because when we're doing things the right way, and we're trying to please the Lord, guess who's coming? Trouble. The enemy. And we have to be ready to combat that. Because he is a very powerful foe. And the way that we fight and we withstand whatever he throws at us is through the precious blood of Jesus. Because in the name of Jesus, the Bible tells us, Satan must flee. Because he's a defeated foe, right? All right. What do you think about that? I love this. I feel like I'm telling the story. Yeah. It's one of my favorite. Joshua is my favorite book in the Old Testament. This is a close second, though. I just like how that he leads and he challenges the people. Any thoughts? Anything? I must have said it well then. No questions? I just, I like this story. I do. And there's a lot you can pull from it on just how to lead, how to listen, how to be obedient. Just so many, man, you could preach several sermons based off of this through just leading, how to just be obedient, how to not listen to the naysayers. I mean, there's so much that you can pull from it. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Because I'll be the first to tell you, it's real easy sometimes to listen to the negativity of the world, isn't it? You know, we get distracted a lot by all the garbage that filtrates our media and TV. And it's easy to get distracted and discouraged. But like someone was reminding me Sunday, and I've said this before, doesn't matter what the media, what the culture tells us, or what this old world tries to promote. I know who's still on the throne. And so that settles it for me. Doesn't matter what they do, I know who's already finished it. And I know who's completed the work. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. All right. Let's go ahead and let's stand tonight. We'll pray. Let's remember all those prayer requests. Remember Sunday, our services. And like I said, we mentioned before about the weather. If anything happens or pops up and we've got some questionable weather, just call the church number that we provided. There'll be a recording on there giving you the details on whether we're going to have service or not. So just remember that. All right. Let me pray for us and we'll be dismissed. Father, in the name of Jesus, we come before you thanking you for this wonderful opportunity to be here just to talk about an excellent example of things that we all need to have in our own personal life that we see with Nehemiah. And I pray that we can just take those things to heart, we can apply them, and be challenged to live better for you and more closely to you. We pray for safety as we travel home, and we thank you so much for Jesus, your Son, and we ask all this in His name. Amen.